am having, Mac.
If you've been following my channel for quite some time now, you will know that I was a very heavy advocate for Sonic Prime. From its first advertisement, I had made claims that this would be the best Sonic the Hedgehog TV show. Now, this claim was not backed by anything other than my definition for what constitutes a Sonic the Hedgehog TV series. What I mean by that is simply asking the questions, does the series focus on Sonic? Does the series not stray from its popular in-game elements? If the answer is yes to both of those questions, then the show is truly a Sonic the Hedgehog TV series. Sonic Prime was and is a series that constantly proves time and time again that it leans into what makes Sonic really special. Of course, the series has introduced several new elements, and I believe at times the characterization deviates from what has been provided by the games. However, out of all of the Sonic the Hedgehog series created thus far, I think we can all agree that Sonic Prime stays the truest to what Sonic the Hedgehog should be. While being entertaining shows, the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic Saturday AM suffer from time. These series have aged poorly and no longer represent what Sonic is supposed to be. Sonic Boom is supposed to be a show about a Sonic spin-off game, so while it was the best thing we've received from the Sonic Boom line, and a pretty darn good series on its own, it's not a great reflection of the mainline series. In the end, bias aside, Sonic X is the only series that I would argue stays true to the characters and remains at least somewhat relevant to the current era of Sonic the Hedgehog. So while I believe Prime is a more accurate representation of the current state of the series, I wanted to figure out which between the two, Sonic X and Sonic Prime, was the better TV series overall. In this video, I'll be breaking down both shows in a multitude of different categories, those being Artstyle Animation, Characterization, Action Sequences, Dialogue, Story, and at the end, I will provide my final thoughts. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to see more content like this, and also turn on the post notifications bell to never miss a video from me. You do not want to miss what I have to say. With that out of the way, let's jump right off into it. I have always been one who preferred the 2D art style of Sonic the Hedgehog and just 2D art in general over 3D art. Granted, I do love seeing a good Sonic 3D render, but Yuakawa's Sonic art style has always captivated me. Sonic and his style has always just looked so fresh. That said, I haven't really come across any official 2D artwork of Sonic that I just didn't like. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing for the 3D renders. Sonic has had some trash renders in the past. I say all that to say, when I found out that Prime was going to be a 3D animated series, I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping to see Yuakawa's art style in the Sonic series become fully realized. It would have just been so cool to see. But instead of looking and thinking about what could have been, let's talk about what Sonic Prime is, an excellently animated and visually pleasing cartoon series. And even in spite of the fact that 3D animated series aren't preferable to me, it feels like every frame of Sonic Prime has been handled wonderfully down to the very last detail. Every character looks so well made, and in my opinion, the show is just very fun and colorful to look at. The characters look nearly identical to how they look in the games with very few changes, whether it's giving the characters more textured fur or quills, or slightly changing their outfits like giving Amy sleeves or something. Of course, I'm not going to ignore Rouge getting a full outfit change, but I think it was done for obvious reasons, and I wouldn't exactly say this is the first time her character has gotten a design change. All things considered, I believe the show's art style is wonderful, and the design choices for the characters really helps it stand out. Along with the show's art style, the animation is just awesome. This is probably the best piece of animation for Sonic, as the characters are very expressive and cartoony. These characters are not limited in their movements or expressions. Every movement has weight, and because of that, all the sequences feel very engaging. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing for Sonic X. While I personally did like the art style of Sonic X, one of the biggest areas for improvement the show needed was in its animation department. If you have ever watched a video of me talking about Sonic X, you will know how near and dear this show is to me. The very first video on this channel was about the aforementioned series, but even I am well aware of the show's many flaws, with animation being one of its biggest. I'm not sure if it was because the show did not have a high enough budget or whatever, but there are times where several frames where these characters are colored incorrectly or just look completely out of place, or just weird, like their heads are oversized in comparison to the rest of their body. It could be the most serious scene in the show in terms of the dialogue or story, but having Sonic's head too big for his body completely takes you out of the scene and instead reminds you of just how goofy this show looks overall. Needless to say, I'm going to have to say that in terms of both art style and animation, I'm giving the point to Sonic Prime. Yes, Sonic X has its moments where it does look pretty good, but the moments where it looks jarring are way too high in comparison to its descendant, Sonic Prime. Although, one thing I must give credit to Sonic X for, in favor of Sonic Prime, is that it doesn't even deviate even the slightest bit from the in-game designs. Every character looks as if they had come straight out of the game, as X makes an effort to show these characters at their finest. In my opinion, I like how Sonic X did not make any changes, and as I said earlier, I do prefer 2D over 3D. but I'm still giving the point to Prime because overall, it's much higher quality of animation. I'm gonna be honest with you right off the bat, this point is going straight to Sonic X. I cannot begin to tell you how easy this decision was. Now, that isn't to say that Sonic Prime's characterization for its core characters was bad, it was just something I was not expecting nor hoped to see out of a Sonic TV series. In my review of Sonic Prime, I talked about how the show feels a bit too kid-friendly at times. The characters and the way they carry themselves feels goofy and out of character at times. As someone who has been a Sonic fan for what feels like forever, I know this character. I know these characters. So it was not exactly rocket science to pick up on the behavioral inconsistencies between these iterations. Do I hate the way these characters were portrayed in the series? No, I think it's fine. Are there moments that made me cringe even a little bit? Absolutely. Of course, Sonic X has scenes like that too, but more on that later. But as far as Sonic Prime goes, I don't know. Sonic just comes off a bit too much at times. Like, there's a moment in the show where he refuses to listen to Tails. He apologizes for it later in the next scene, but it just felt so out of character. You can make the argument that there are games where Sonic ignores Tails' advice, like in Sonic Lost World. This is a very valid and great point. However, as a counterclaim, I never once said Sonic's characterization in Lost World was in character either. The game portrays Sonic just as, if not more poorly than Prime does. Neither is great. Both are passable at best in my opinion. Admittedly, I may be straying from what I initially set out to do, which was to provide a general review of both series and come to the conclusion on which was better overall, but this is very much important to me. When I'm watching a show, I want to like these characters. Prime's iteration of Sonic is likable, but in my opinion, because the show is based off of a pre-existing popular IP, it has to replicate the characters in such a way that makes them almost appear indistinguishable from the games. Again, Prime's version of Sonic is not bad, but to me, it feels like, at times, it's just not Sonic. I almost feel like Amy from that one cutscene in Sonic 06 when she's yelling at Silver when I saw that Sonic was surprised that a bird could fly in episode 5.
That's crazy! Sonic would never do that!
That aside though, Sonic X's characterization just felt so raw and real to me. Every single one of the characters that were from the games was just so well written in my opinion. Full transparency, I may be a little biased because it's this show that made me a diehard Sonic fan in the first place. Growing up and watching this show on 4Kids was an absolute blast. I knew about this show before I had played any of the games like Sonic Adventure or Adventure 2, so all of the stories and characters felt very fresh. My introduction to Chaos, Shadow, Rouge, and many of the other characters was directly through this series. That is to say, this is the foundation in which I understand Sonic characters. To me, this is the best portrayal of all these characters because for the longest time, this was all I really knew. But even after playing lots and lots of Sonic games and gaining a better understanding of the series, the lore, and its characters, I would argue that Sonic X, bias aside, still nails it. I know for a lot of people this was the era where people began to hate Amy Rose because of her obsession with Sonic, but I don't know, maybe my sense of humor sucks, but I thought it was funny. I never had a problem with Amy Rose. I saw her as comic relief. Every time she was on the screen I was laughing, but at the same time, I recognized that she was still a force to be reckoned with. When you had episodes that focused on characters from the game, I found myself enjoying them very much. However, when you had episodes that put Chris Thorndike or nearly any of the X original characters at the forefront, it was a total snooze fest. I didn't care for any of these characters as main characters. They're fine as the accompaniment, but if they're given starring roles in the forefront for 22 minutes, they can be the longest 22 minutes of life. I'm not even someone who hates Chris. I'm not someone who's going to sit here and bash him over his actions that took place in episode 51. I understand his actions and have gotten to a point where I somewhat appreciate the character and understand what the vision was, but I'm not changing my mind on the fact that he is an unnecessary inclusion who, more often than not, makes the series worse. The show thrives when he just isn't there or when he's taking a back seat because quite literally every single one of the main characters in the games are just so well written and entertaining. This point easily goes to Sonic X, although major props to Sonic Prime because it never shifts a focus even slightly off the titular character, which is something Sonic X does a lot. This is a section I've already lightly dabbled into briefly when talking about the animation of the series, but using the argument I had previously offered, Prime wins this category with ease. Honestly, I would say that the reason Sonic fans should watch Prime is because of the action sequences. This is Prime's greatest strong suit, and honestly, it's really awesome too because there are several in each episode. These are the moments where you don't want to take your eyes off the screen, and to be frank, it's pretty hard to. It's funny because as a kid, this was exactly how I saw and remembered Sonic X's action sequences, but looking at them now, yeah, it's not great. Actually, to be blunt, it's awful. Sonic X has some of the coolest premises for fights that, when I was younger, they just appeared so much cooler in my head. But now, as a 20-year-old watching the series, I feel like it's just PNGs gliding across the screen, or as I previously called it, a glorified Google Slides presentation. Seriously, the show's animation was already just okay at best, but the action sequences make them just so much worse. I'm not asking for Demon Slayer level of quality here, but just something better than this. I really don't want to beat a dead horse because I think I made myself pretty clear on how I feel about Sonic X's animation, but to sort of wrap things up, Sonic X's animation sequences are just as bad as Sonic Prime's are good. So that should give you kind of pretty good insight on how stellar the fights are in Prime, with each one being better than the last. Once again, Sonic Prime takes the point on this one. Originally, I had planned on talking about these two separately, but I ended up restating my thoughts and just being a bit redundant, so I figured it best to just talk about them cohesively, despite being different topics of conversation. However, a story is often told through the actions and inactions of the characters presented, so I think it still works fine either way. Anyway, while Sonic Prime has a more overarching story than Sonic X, as the former has a more episodic narrative, X still has an underlying story where the characters from the games find themselves in a world foreign to them with humans and plenty of new places. In terms of the story, this was probably the hardest category to rank because I think both are pretty good in their own right. Neither are exactly what I would call unique because the whole concept of ending up in a strange new world is overdone. It literally has its own genre called isekai. And nowadays you can't even step outside without seeing someone create yet another multiverse story. That said, both stories were unique to Sonic, so I don't have a problem with either. So what helped me come to the conclusion on which was better was the way the story was told, its dialogue. The way in which the characters interact with one another is supposed to properly set the scene, foreshadow future events, and allow you to understand what the character might be thinking at that point in time. Using that information, I would have to say that Sonic X gets the win on this one. Not because Sonic Prime doesn't have a good story or because it has bad dialogue, because in truth, it doesn't. Instead, Sonic X receives the win because I believe the area in which Sonic X thrives in is its characterization. Because the characters are distinctly crafted, the interactions between them is not only very entertaining, but very unique. Some characters have comically good chemistry like Knuckles and Rouge, or Sonic and Amy, and Sonic and Knuckles. I believe so far I have yet to see that with Sonic Prime. We don't get many exchanges between other characters outside of Sonic and another, and if we do, it's pretty basic. Characters like Knuckles and Rouge, who are known to have a fiery relationship, don't have anything of the sort in Prime. The show gives us important information about the characters like how Tails is a techie smart guy, or how Rouge is the big fan of jewelry, or how Shadow is a man all about business, but I believe the show fails to show us interesting dynamics that make the story more captivating. That's likely due in part to the fact that the story is exclusively focused on Sonic, where Sonic X will spend several minutes away from Sonic or even giving entire episodes to characters like Knuckles or Shadow to help the viewer better understand the characters and become further invested in the world building. I believe that a story is important, but you could have the most surface level bare bones story be at least somewhat interesting if it's told through fun and wacky character dynamics. Sonic Prime's story is good, but the way it's told unfortunately can be a little uninteresting at times. That said, the point here goes to Sonic X. Both Sonic Prime and Sonic X have room for improvement, but in the end, remain as very solid shows. Honestly, I believe that the best Sonic show would be Sonic Prime's animation with Sonic X's characterization and storytelling. You truly would have the best of both worlds. But again, let's focus on what is instead of what isn't. And it's important to remember that what I'm going to say next is entirely my opinion, just like this entire video has been and every video on my channel is. Sonic X is not only a more rewatchable show for me, but it's a show I ultimately prefer. However, I think that Sonic Prime is a better show and obviously better made, which was ultimately the overarching question of the video. That said, I really hope that with the upcoming release of Season 2 of Sonic Prime, we see more interesting character dynamics and better characterization as a whole. I really like what they did with the relationship of Sonic and Shadow, and it seems like it'll be expanded on more in the next season, so I look forward to that. But really having characters like Rouge and Knuckles not interact and Shadow not interact with anyone else outside of Sonic is just strange. Once again, this was an area in which Sonic X thrived. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. But with all that said and done, thank you all so much for watching. This is Sonic signing out. Have a super blessed day, y'all.
Why are you playing that trash?